Welcome to our deep dive for January 5th, 2025. We're going to take you on a whirlwind tour of all the big news today. The stuff you need to know.
Think of us as those friends, the ones who somehow read all the papers
Yeah.
and distilled it all down to the good stuff, the context, the implications, maybe some things to think about that weren't even in the articles.
Exactly. So international stuff, U.S. politics, a bit of tech and health news in there.
Right.
And because, well, the world's a weird place, maybe even some of the bizarre news just to lighten things up.
And it's fascinating how often those kind of random weird events actually tell us a lot about what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's dive in. The story that really grabbed me today.
Yeah.
Liri Albag, you remember her, right? The 19-year-old Israeli hostage held by Hamas in Gaza.
Right.
Since October 2023. Well, a new video of her just surfaced today, and it's tough to watch. Even her family put out a statement saying they didn't authorize this release, and she's visibly distressed. There's this one quote, she says, and this is from the video, quote, provided in source material. It's heartbreaking.
And this video comes at a really crucial time because Israel and Hamas are actually back at the negotiating table trying to work out a ceasefire.
Right.
251 hostages were taken, 96 are still being held, 34 reported dead. It makes you wonder, is this video a desperate plea from Hamas?
Yeah.
A way to kind of gain leverage in these negotiations, or is there something else going on entirely?
Yeah. Adds a whole other layer, right, to this already tense situation. Speaking of tense, get this. We just learned that President Biden was briefed on potential U.S. military strikes against Iran's nuclear sites.
Okay.
Just weeks before Trump took office.
So before the inauguration?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wild, right?
That's huge. What a dilemma for Biden,
Right.
right? I mean, imagine facing the possibility of Iran getting nuclear weapons fast. And a new president is about to come in, and we know his approach to foreign policy could be unpredictable.
Right.
So do you take drastic action? What are the consequences? Huge questions. No easy answers in a situation like that.
And now we have Trump in office.
Right.
But with that felony conviction still kind of hanging over his head.
Right.
A judge set his sentencing for January 10th.
Yeah.
But he's already said no jail time, no probation, not even a fine.
So that means Trump's about to become the first U.S. president to take office with a felony conviction. Ever.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the presidency? Does it set some kind of precedent? How does it affect, public trust in the office going forward? It's uncharted territory, really.
Yeah, it is. A lot to unpack there. Unfortunately, the news from the Middle East doesn't get much better. UNRWA, that's the UN agency that helps Palestinian refugees.
Right.
They're actually getting ready to shut down their services in the West Bank and Gaza because of these new restrictions that Israel's put in place.
Yeah. And the consequences of that are, well, they're really worrying. Jamie McGoldrick, who used to head up UN aid there, said shutting down UNRWA would have a massive impact. He said a massive impact on an already catastrophic situation.
All right.
You think about it. Millions of people rely on UNRWA for basic stuff. Food, healthcare, education.
Yeah. Complicated situation, right?
Yeah.
You have the UN saying potential humanitarian crisis, ringing the alarm bells. But on the other hand, what are Israel's reasons for these restrictions?
Right.
It's important to try to understand, their perspective as well.
What are they hoping to achieve?
Yeah, exactly.
A big question.
It really highlights how complex this whole decades-long conflict is.
Yeah.
Where both sides have very real concerns, legitimate grievances.
Absolutely.
Okay, I need a break from this heavy stuff.
Me too.
Let's move on to something a bit lighter. How about Elon Musk? He's been busy criticizing both Biden and the UK Prime Minister online. He even called Biden's decision to give George Soros the Presidential Medal of Freedom a travesty. He said, quote, provided in source material.
Musk really knows how to get people talking. It makes you think about the influence people like him have in our online world, this world that's, increasingly polarized. Do these comments actually change people's minds? Or are they just noise? I don't know.
Well, love him or hate him, he knows how to get in the headlines. All right, shifting gears again, this time to AI. Fable AI, they're an artificial intelligence company, had to take down some of the features on their platform because their AI started creating some really offensive content.
Yeah, it was the AI was creating these summaries that included really biased, inappropriate comments about people based on their race, gender, all sorts of things.
Wow.
It's a reminder that even as AI gets more advanced, we're still dealing with the problem of bias.
Yeah.
And if we're not careful, these systems will just end up perpetuating, harmful stereotypes instead of challenging them.
Right. And as AI gets even more powerful, that problem's only going to get bigger.
Exactly.
Speaking of things that might cause problems down the road, did you see that the U.S. Surgeon General is calling for cancer warnings to be put on alcohol labels?
I did see that, yeah.
What do you think?
It's interesting. It reminds me of the, public health campaigns we've seen for things like tobacco. It makes you think, how effective are those kinds of warnings, really? Do they actually change what people do, or do they just become another label that we learn to ignore?
Yeah, good question. And honestly, after all that heavy news, I think we all deserve a little palate cleanser.
I agree.
So up next, we're going to dive into some of the more bizarre, quirky stories of the day.
Don't underestimate the power of a good, weird news story. Sometimes those can be the most insightful.
That's true. Sometimes they are.
Ah,
All right, let's do it. Okay, you ready for this? A food worker at this place, MS Halal Food in New York City, got caught on video catching a pigeon with his bare hands.
I saw that.
It's exactly what it sounds like. The guy just
Yep.
scoops it up like it's no big deal.
You can practically hear the whole internet gasping in unison.
Right.
It definitely sparked a lot of conversations about, like, food safety, hygiene. I mean, pigeons aren't exactly known for being clean.
No. It's amazing how one little viral video like that can get everyone suddenly talking about, food handling practices, health regulations.
Right.
Even caught the attention of the local authorities.
Really?
Yeah. Power of social media.
Wow. Speaking of things happening in New York, congestion pricing officially started today in Manhattan.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The city that never sleeps is trying to tackle its traffic problem.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, congestion pricing basically means you got to pay a fee to drive into certain parts of Manhattan during like peak hours.
The idea is to reduce traffic, encourage people to use public transit, maybe even improve the air quality a little bit. Be interesting to see how it works in practice.
Yeah.
Will people actually change their commuting habits? Less traffic?
Yeah.
Cleaner air? Who knows?
Yeah. Only time will tell. It's definitely a bold move. I'm sure other cities around the world are going to be watching this closely to see what happens. Okay, ready for another curveball?
Yeah, hit me.
This one's about an American influencer, Kristen Fisher. She's been getting some heat online for complaining about how late dinners are served in India.
Yeah, classic example of cultural differences clashing.
Right.
What's normal in one culture can be totally confusing in another.
Yeah.
And then social media comes along and just amplifies these misunderstandings, blows them up into these huge debates, global scale.
Yeah. In this case, it seems like Ms. Fisher might need a little reminder about, the importance of being open to different cultural norms when you're traveling.
Yeah.
But hey, it's a good reminder for all of us, right? Travel is not just about seeing new places. It's about experiencing new ways of life, different perspectives.
Well said. Speaking of unexpected things, did you hear about the Indian entrepreneur and author Ankur Warikoo?
No. What about him?
He just admitted that he didn't actually write his own book.
Wait, seriously? Which book are we talking about?
His book, Do Epic Shit. Turns out it was ghostwritten. He only just came clean about it.
Wow. That's pretty wild. Raises some questions about authorship and transparency in the whole publishing industry. How much control does an author really have if their book is ghostwritten? How upfront should they be with readers about that process?
Those are questions that have been debated for years. And this whole situation with Warikoo, it's like throwing fuel on the fire. This is going to be a big topic of conversation for a while.
Yeah, I bet. Now let's circle back to something a bit more serious for a minute. Remember that hostage situation we were talking about earlier, Liri Albag being held by Hamas?
Yes. The video that was released today, that story is directly connected to a much bigger issue that's been brewing for a while. The possibility of the U.S. launching military strikes against Iran's nuclear sites.
Yeah, that's some seriously scary stuff. There were, rumors about this a few weeks ago, but it seemed almost too crazy to be true.
Well, here's what we know. Back when Biden was still president, he was actually briefed on potential military options for striking Iran. This was before Trump took office. And the briefing, it included scenarios where Iran might be trying to develop nuclear weapons really quickly.
So Biden was faced with this impossible decision, right? Do nothing, risk Iran getting nukes, or take military action, which could have, devastating consequences for the entire region.
Exactly. Lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
And to make it even more complicated, this all happened right before Trump came in with his, let's say, unconventional approach to foreign policy.
So where does that leave us now? With Trump in office, is the threat of military action higher or lower?
That's the million-dollar question. Nobody knows what's going to happen, especially with someone as unpredictable as Trump calling the shots. But one thing's for sure, the stakes are incredibly high. The potential consequences of any action or inaction could be catastrophic.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. And speaking of things that are hard to think about, let's come back to the situation with UNRWA shutting down operations in the West Bank and Gaza.
This story deserves our full attention because it really has the potential to impact millions of lives. We talked about it earlier. UNRWA provides essential services to Palestinian refugees. And the Israeli government's decision to impose these new restrictions has basically forced them to prepare for a complete shutdown.
It's hard to even imagine the scale of the impact. We're talking about people losing access to food, healthcare, education, the things they need to survive.
It's not just a humanitarian crisis either. It's a potential political powder keg.
Yeah.
The UN's already expressed serious concerns, and this is only going to further escalate tensions in the region. It feels like we're teetering on the edge of something really bad.
So how did we get here? What led to this point where UNRWA is being forced to shut down?
Well, it's a complex issue, long history. One key factor is the Israeli government's argument. They say that UNRWA actually perpetuates the refugee problem. By passing refugee status down through generations, they say it's preventing refugees from integrating into other societies and essentially keeping the conflict alive.
So they're blaming UNRWA for the ongoing stalemate.
In a way, yes. But of course, there are other perspectives on this issue. Critics of Israel's stance argue that the government's using UNRWA as a scapegoat, that the real issue is the continued occupation of Palestinian territories.
Right.
It's a classic case, two sides with deeply entrenched positions, neither one willing to budge.
And in the middle of it all is the Palestinian people who are going to suffer the most. If UNRWA has to close its doors, it's a tragic situation, one we need to keep a close eye on.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap things up, there's one more story I want to touch on. It might not be as, attention-grabbing as some of the others, but I think it's incredibly important.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's this important story?
It's about Lieutenant General Herbert R. Temple, Jr. He was former chief of the National Guard Bureau. He passed away, actually, at 96, back on December 29th.
Oh, wow. That's sad to hear. I got to admit, though, it doesn't exactly sound like front-page news. Why do you think it's so important?
I think sometimes the most important stories aren't the ones that, grab the headlines or trend on social media. Sometimes it's the stories that remind us about, the values, the institutions, the individuals that really shape our world, often quietly, without a lot of fanfare.
I see what you mean. Lieutenant General Temple, he dedicated his life to serving his country, and his, contributions to the National Guard, they were significant. It's easy to overlook those kinds of stories when we're constantly bombarded with so much information.
Exactly. It's crucial to be mindful, of what we choose to focus on. Be aware of those biases and filters that shape how we see the world. We can't let the loudest voices always drown out the important ones.
How do we do that? How do we make sure we're not just passively consuming information, but, actively engaging with it, seeking out those stories that might not be screaming for our attention?
It starts with curiosity, I think. Don't be afraid to dig deeper, explore beyond the surface, challenge your own assumptions. And sometimes it means, disconnecting from the noise, taking some time to reflect on what truly matters.
It's about finding that balance, right? Staying informed, but also protecting ourselves from information overload, knowing when to dive deep and when to, step back and process it all.
Exactly. It's a constant learning process, figuring out how to navigate this information landscape. But I think it's essential if we want to be informed, engaged, responsible citizens.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've covered a lot today, from hostage crises and military threats to quirky news and the quiet passing of a, dedicated public servant. It's been a whirlwind tour of January 5th, 2025.
It's just a snapshot, a tiny glimpse into the complexities of our world. We encourage you to dig deeper into any of the stories that grabbed you. Seek out diverse perspectives. Never stop questioning, exploring.
Because as we've seen today, even in the most unexpected places, there are lessons to be learned, connections to be made, and most importantly, there's always more to discover.
So, as you go about your day, we leave you with this. How do you decide what truly matters in a world overflowing with information? What stories will you choose to amplify? What impact will you have on the world around you?
That's something for all of us to think about. Till next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.